We're going to finish up this unit by talking about two areas. One is the biomes. And you will recall that biomes are defined as geographical areas that have a specific climate and a specific flora and fauna that are associated with that climate. And one of the important aspects of the biome is to understand that there's something called a climax community. And this is the combination of the region's climax vegetation. You'll remember this is the vegetation that primarily defines the biome and its animal population. And the thing to remember is that the plant life that's present in a particular geography is what defines it as a biome. So each biome is unique because it has characteristic climate, characteristic geography, which results in the climax vegetation that's present. This is just a map that goes through the very many different biomes that you can see in the world. And for example, up here, this is Siberia in Russia, and this is the northern Canada Arctic Circle area, and all of these are part of the Arctic tundra. You see it here. The Arctic or Taiga and Arctic tundra is up in this area, and then as we go forward, you can see that these biomes are very different. Now here's the Arctic tundra with primarily snow and some associated vegetation, but not much, and animals that are particularly associated with this. Here's the forest areas. This is a grassland. Sometimes this would be consistent with prairie or the Pampas region in Argentina. This is a desert, consistent with what is found, say, in Africa, in the Sahara Desert. And then biomes can also exist in the water, which is what is illustrated with this picture here. And so when you look at biomes, they can be characterized from temperature and from the amount of rain that's available. And so the temperature hot, lots of rain, you have a rainforest. Temperature hot, no rain, you have a desert. You know, as the temperature goes down, you see there's more vegetation and more variety of vegetation. As the amount of water decreases, you see that the amount of vegetation decreases. And then up here at the top, it's very cold, and there's really not much difference in terms of how much precipitation there is. And this is the polar region. So the first that I'm going to talk about is the Arctic tundra. This is characterized by long, harsh winters, freezing temperatures, ice, and snow. And in the most northern parts of these areas, it never melts. It never goes away. And this results in an area known as the permafrost. The permafrost is the frozen area of ground and soil that is permanently in that state. People that live in this area where there's a permafrost, they can't be buried in this area when they die. Their bodies actually have to be shipped south. Because if you're buried in the permafrost, you never decompose because you're frozen in the ground. The alpine tundra, which is a little bit more southern aspects of these, is like that of the Arctic, but there's no permafrost. And the principal reason for the Arctic temperatures is the mountains that exist with the more southern areas. The next we're moving from north to south, and then from south to north from below. And the next area is known as the northern coniferous forest. And we will talk about conifers, which are a specific type of tree that doesn't produce leaves. It produces cones, and that's why it's called a conifer. And it's like the tundra in many ways. However, it has enough temperature and enough rain to allow for trees to flourish, these specific trees. and it's very rare to see a permafrost. So these are also known, further south, even further south, is something known as the temperate rainforest, which is warmer and wetter, but still has quite a bit of cold winters and lots of snow. The southern pine forest is another variation of this coniferous forest, and this is found in like North Carolina and Georgia, but the climate is significantly warmer. So the northern coniferous forest has various areas, the most common being defined up here, but also more temperate areas and even warmer areas in more southern regions. The third biome we'll talk about is the temperate deciduous forest. And you are exposed to this all the time because this is Kentucky. Kentucky is a temperate deciduous forest. And deciduous forests are leaf bearers. Instead of cones and needles, you have leaves. And the leaves are dropped in the fall and come back in the spring. It's generally hot summers, cold winters, and well-defined seasons, which is one of the reasons that I like living in this area, is that we have well-defined seasons. Now the grasslands, there are actually several different areas of grasslands and several different areas. They're generally great soil, good weather, flat, lots of grass, very little trees. One grassland is known as the prairie. The prairie is in North America. It's a grassy area in the Midwest and West, and it's primarily places where, quote unquote, the buffalo used to roam, and those were called prairies. Similar areas, more tropical in nature, but similar areas of grasslands found primarily in Africa and northern South America are called savannas. And savannas contain, again, occasional trees, some undergrowth, but primarily grass. It's a region characterized by grassy plains and without closed forests. And there are rivers and lakes. And near the rivers and lakes, you will find some tree-lined areas. The last one I was going to mention is the Pampas, which is the specific area in South America where grasslands are. This is a great area for raising cattle, as is the prairie regions in North America. So if we look at, here's an example of the prairie region in North America. In the middle here, the elephant gives it away. This is the savanna in Africa. And then this is the Pampas region in South America, primarily Argentina. Then one you never will forget are the deserts, and everybody knows about deserts. Deserts generally are defined by the fact that more water is lost by evaporation than is gained by the fall of rain, and so it's a very desolate, generally mostly sand, very little vegetation, and very little in the way of animal life. The Sahara, which is in Africa, is the largest of the world's deserts. And then the absolute opposite of the desert is the tropical rainforest. These found in Hawaii. Here you can see the picture. They're also found in Brazil and in the parts of Asia. It's hot, humid, with abundant rain, generally near the equator. There's an enormous amount of diverse vegetation, as you can see in this picture. Animals in this region, because of the thick, dense ground vegetation, primarily live in trees, and that's how they move about, is they move about in trees. And this is very common in the rainforest regions, which, you think of monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees in this area. Now, the water also has areas of biome, or areas that are defined as biomes. The aquatic biomes are areas that are covered with water and that these areas are larger than the terrestrial biomes. Freshwater ecosystems are classified between those that have flowing water and those that have standing water, but they have no salt water. An ecosystem that's associated with the ocean is called a marine ecosystem. Estuary is a nutrient-rich freshwater from rivers and streams that mix in or flow into the saltwater regions and oceans. Coral reefs, which are found in various areas of the ocean, are remains of coral organisms and coralline algae. Now, there are several zones that are defined in the ocean, and as you move out from the shore, the first is called the intertidal, which is generally defined as between high tide and low tide. Littoral zones are the same as the intertidal zones. The neritic zone is the region beyond the intertidal zone before you get to the continental shelf as you move out from the shore. Another name for the neritic zone is the coastal zone. And then the oceanic zone is that area that extends out from the continental shelf into the open sea. So here's a diagram looking at the various zones. You start at the shore over here. You have the neritic intertidal zone here, which is just high tide to low tide. Then you have the neritic zone, which is from the continental shelf over to where the intertidal zone ends. And you can see that this is very shallow. And then the continental shelf is where the oceans become deeper, and you have the oceanic zone from there. This is just another picture showing the same thing. You have high tide to low tide, which is the tidal zone. Then the next zone, the neritic zone, is in this area to get the continental shelf, and there's a lot of various wildlife that lives in there. And then from the continental shelf on out, and there are subzones here that we didn't talk about. The abyssal zone, which is very deep, the bathyt zone, which is intermediate, and then the more shallow areas where a lot of the larger fish and so forth live. These you don't have to know. These are not areas that are mentioned in your book. Now let's talk about what happens when disaster occurs. Something called ecological succession. Ecological succession is how the ecology or the ecological area recovers from a severe stress. The first species that shows up once an ecosystem is disturbed is called the pioneer species. And as I said, the ecological succession is a series of changes that come as a result of the pioneer species activity after a severe stress, like a volcano erupting, etc. The primary succession is the ecological succession in which plants and animals colonize the barren habitat. Secondary is the natural process that occurs once the ecosystem is established, and then some of the plants and animals still exist. So primary succession is when the stress completely wipes out the habitat. Secondary succession is when there's a severe disturbance. However, some of the animals and plants still exist, and so there's a foundation which to build the new ecosystem on. So here we have the primary succession. Shows you begin with bare rock. Then initially you have the pioneer species, lichens, small animals and plants, and then ultimately grasslands. And then intermediate species appear, and then ultimately you reach a climax community. Secondary succession is you have a climax disturbance. There's a disturbance, climax community, there's a disturbance. Then there's still something left, and the rocks and moss begin on that something that's left, and the grasses then grow, etc., until you have a return of the climax community. So let's finish by talking briefly about man's role. Man was given dominion at the time of the creation. And dominion means that all of creation is under man's authority. But he was also given a responsibility called stewardship. The stewardship is a responsibility to manage creation in a way that manages or uses the environmental gifts that God has given while conserving natural resources. Conservation is defined as the protection of Earth's biodiversity and natural ecosystems. Now, there are renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are those that can replenish themselves over time, even if they're used or consumed, while non-renewable resources are those natural resources that cannot recover on their own. This diagram just shows an example of both renewable and non-renewable resources. Plants and water are renewable. Non-renewable include coal, soil, and minerals, which cannot be recreated. Another example, you see on the left the renewable resources, and this is focusing on energy, and renewable energy includes solar energy, hydraulic power, which with the cycling of water is renewable, geothermal energy, which is energy from the earth, and then wind energy. On the right is non-renewable energy, which includes fossil fuel oil, coal, nuclear energy, and natural gas.